We begin with Andy Sheehan and the latest from the jury selection process in the courtroom. Andy.
Well, Ken, as you said, this case has been a long time coming to trial, and today began jury selection, which is crucial to both the defense and the prosecution, and whether the defendant faces the death penalty. As jury selection began, defense attorney Judy Clark and her team arrived at court this morning with one aim in mind. There's little question her client is responsible for the death of 11 people and the injury of 4 others. But Clark wants to find jurors who might spare him the death penalty. Judy, are you disappointed there was no plea bargain? The government twice rejected Clark's offer of a guilty plea in exchange for life in prison for Robert Bowers, and so the case is going to trial. Today, both her team and government prosecutors began interviewing prospective jurors individually, drilling down on their feelings about the death penalty. Trial Judge Robert Colville told prospective jurors they may be asked to make a, quote, personal moral judgment as to whether the defendant should live or die. The defendant, dressed in a gray sweater, appeared intently interested in each prospective juror, taking notes and whispering to defense counselors as each was queried about whether they could potentially impose the death penalty. One prospective juror says she was, quote, on the fence about the death penalty, but said she believed she could impose it if the evidence compelled her. Another said he was, quote, pro-death penalty, and yet another woman shed tears saying, quote, it was a house of worship. It should have been a safe place. I don't know how much more heinous an action could be. But upon seeing the defendant, she said, quote, he's a person, not a monster. He's a person, and that surprised me.
A defense in a case like this is going to need a juror who will be able to keep an open mind.
If and when guilt is established in this case, the trial will move to the sentencing phase, in which the defense is expected to argue the defendant is schizophrenic with deep-seated psychological problems and should be spared death, while the prosecution will discount that and try to show in detail the defendant knowingly and willingly committed a premeditated hate crime of unimaginable horror. According to law professor Bruce Ankowiak, the government will be looking for jurors most willing to vote for execution.
That has to be a very heavy burden on a person. And an individual would have to have a certain degree of inner capacity, inner strength, if you will, that they would be able, if they made this judgment, to actually impose that penalty on another person. And I think that's the kind of individual the government would be looking for.
But it will only take one juror to vote against the death penalty to result in a hung jury. And a hung jury would mean there would be no death penalty. I'll have more on that at 6 o'clock and more on this jury selection process. Reporting live at the federal courthouse downtown, Andy Sheehan, KDKA News.